A very good day to everybody and welcome to this nexxworks webinar about disruptive business models for the future of mobility. My name is Joren Lemigre and I'll be your host for today. There's likely more than one reason why you have joined today's session, but we suspect it has something to do with what we are seeing on our roads today. Yes, indeed, that single hipster on his electric scooter has multiplied in a plethora of different mobility users that we are seeing in our cities and on the roads today. Every user has his or her own expectations and different needs, so it's very hard to plan ahead and foresee what is going to happen. Whether you're a city planner, an insurer, or a server in a restaurant, mobility is affecting us all. At nexxworks, we try to look beyond today, and we're happy to host this webinar to help you understand how you can adapt to these changes in mobility and how transportation, and to show you how transportation is going to shape your world or your business model in the next 10 years. So stay with us. Behind the scenes, I'm being assisted by my lovely colleague France, who, despite her name, does speak more than one language. Yes, sorry, I'm fun at parties, I know. But don't hesitate to share your expectations, questions, or whatever you like throughout the chat, because France will be there. She's assisting me behind the scenes, and she will make sure we will be replying to your questions. Before we jump in, uh, I would just like to launch a quick poll to warm up a little bit. It's something we definitely would like to do more during this webinar. If everything goes right, the poll that or the question that we would like to ask to you will pop up right now on your screen. And it has something to do with COVID-19. So we all know that COVID definitely has had an impact on mobility, but has it affected your mobility and do you think it will last? It's something we would love to hear because it will definitely come back later on into the discussion or in the webinar. Um, I can see the I can see the answers coming in right now, and it looks wow. I mean, it looks like quite a lot of people are making less trips than they were doing before. Um, Basically, that's what we're going to see as well right now in the webinar as well. Both David, Rick, and Toby, they are all based at home. I'm based in our office back in Ghent, but indeed, everybody is making less trips. And 81% of everybody who is participating actually says that they also expect these changes will last. So I think that's really good food for thought and something we would love to talk about later on in the discussion. Um, Before we really get started, just a couple of practicalities I would like to share with you. It's a webinar, so your camera is turned off and your microphone is muted, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear about you and what you think. So don't hesitate to share everything you want in the chat in below on your screen, or share your questions through the Q&A here in Zoom. There are different ways you can have our attention. You can give us a question in the Q&A. You can raise your hand, but also if you see a question that you like and you definitely want to have answered, please just give it an upvote. We'll try to tackle as much questions as possible. Of course, if we have a lot of questions, it's not always easy to answer them all live, but we'll do our utter best to make this happen. Um, right. So I would like to get started and introduce our first speaker of today. And it might be somebody you haven't heard about yet, but I'm very excited to have him here. It's David Dixon, and David, he's an expert in urban planning and design at Stantec. Um, just before the webinar, he said it's something you do when you're getting older, when you're old, but I really want to discuss about that because he has the knowledge we need to see how cities are going to evolve. He's revitalizing cities. In the recent times, he has been working on a project in post-Katrina New Orleans. He has planned more than 15 billion in walkable, mixed use, and higher density urban districts. So definitely something we want to have here. David, welcome. I'm happy to have you on the call today. Um, is it correct to assume that not a single city in the US is being built without consulting you? And David seems to be offline. That's kind of strange and
Hi,
disappointing.
no,
Ah, there he is. David,
he was,
welcome. Turn on your camera, please.
uh, okay. Um, okay. Sorry about that. Good morning. Hello. When you get very old, you get to have planned in many places. Sadly, there are many very exciting places I would still love to work, but thank you for the question.
All right, absolutely. So, David, thanks for being here. We'll jump right back to you after we've introduced the other participants. So, the next participant is Toby Allen. Toby is Chief Product Officer at Skipper. It's a startup on a mission to support organizations in a smooth transition to sustainable mobility for their employees. I know that sounds very abstract, like most company mission statements, but we're happy to have Toby here because he has a very thorough knowledge about product management. He has led new technology products at Microsoft, for example, where he worked on the implementation of Microsoft HoloLens. But of course, now today he's working at Skipper. Toby, very glad to have you here. You're talking to us straight from London. But while you have an impressive track record, of course, you're the youngster in this webinar. Are you ready to debate with more than 60 years of experience?
I'm happy to debate at any point on new mobility, especially because I think it's such an important topic today, especially as the world is changing in terms of the impact of COVID, but primarily also the sustainable aspect, which I think is very important too. So very pleased to be here and looking forward to those debates.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. And then we're jumping to our final speaker or our final panelist for today, and that is Rick Vera. Rick is one of the founders of nexxworks. You might have already heard about him. I have been lucky enough to travel some parts of the world together with Rick to explore how mobility is changing from the first hand. We've been to China, we've been to San Francisco, and we've seen quite a lot of exciting stuff happening. Rick is definitely focused on cars and about how mobility in general is going to affect us all. And he has always been very passionate about customer-centric new business models. And that's why we have invited him today. Rick, welcome to the conversation as well. You're a real petrol head and car lover, or do we
Not a
have to
petrol
say
head, but I'm a car lover. Yeah.
exactly? I was going to say, do we have to say electron head nowadays?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm an electric head. Yeah.
Yeah, because you were very excited recently. I saw that you were testing a new electric car. So
Yeah, and I've
maybe
just been invited by two others to test their cars as well. Say, if anybody wants an electric car to be tested, I'm in.
exactly. So Rick, very welcome. I would like to get started with Rick. Rick is first going to show us or tell us about his vision about mobility, followed by David, because they have a very complementary vision. And after that, we're going to jump to the discussion with Toby and see how mobility will evolve. Rick, the stage is absolutely yours.
Yeah, I'll try to find my slides. Wait a sec. Here they are.
We should be good to go,
Yeah.
right?
You
Okay,
see
they're
my
perfect.
slides?
Rick, go for
Okay.
it.
Yeah. Um, you said 60 years of experience. I am only bringing in close to 60 years of passionate curiosity and not experience. That's something completely different. And I also love the poll because the poll said 95% of the participants is doing less miles than they used to do. And that struck me. 81% says they think that they will continue to do this, less miles. So what COVID-19 has shown us is not that COVID-19 has broken a system, it has exposed a broken system, and I love that. Okay, talk about mobility of the future. I think that mobility of the future, and I don't think it, I know that mobility of the future is going to be ACES. And ACES stands for, why is my, yeah. ACES stands for, first of all, autonomous. The A stands for autonomous. Autonomous as in autonomous in a limited area. You don't have to expect that when next year we will have cars that you can put wherever in the world and they'll drive you from A to B. It'll always be in a restricted area and in a very limited zone. But nevertheless, it'll be autonomous. The second is connected. We live in a world of the Internet of Things. Everything is going to be connected, including cars. A car is the ultimate sensor device. It'll be full of sensors and connected to all other devices that have got to do directly or indirectly with mobility. It's going to be electric. Let's face it, all those devices, and let's not call them cars anymore, they will be PCs on wheels. And I've never seen a PC that's driven by a combustion engine. So it is going to be electric. It's going to be battery driven. I don't want anybody to doubt that. And it'll be shared. We're no longer going to buy a car, we're going to share a car. But when I talk about a shared car, that means that somebody has to buy them and that somebody has to maintain them and that somebody has to provide a service. So shared also means fleet owned. So I rather prefer FACE instead of ACES, and the F in FACE then stands for fleet owned. Fleet owned, autonomous, connected and electrical. And why is that future going to be ACES? It's very simple. It is the question of getting Kodaked or Uberize the business. And what is getting Kodaked? Getting Kodaked is not being in tune with a fast changing society and a fast changing customer. And the fast changing society and the fast changing customer and the way companies have to deal with it is, first of all, technology first. It's all about technology. Companies need to be data driven because this is the future. This is the next big wave. We've seen the wave of the internet. We've seen the wave of the social media. We've seen the wave of the platform economy. And this is the next big wave, a combination of big data, artificial intelligence, and robotization. And that is why I'm so fascinated about the new mobility, because new mobility is a result of big data, artificial intelligence, and robotization. All companies, including automotive companies, all companies that are into mobility in some way or another will be into collecting, processing, and activating data. Technology first. The second is red ocean strategy. I do no longer believe in a blue ocean strategy. I do believe in a red ocean strategy. Focus on existing customers and do not fall in love with the solution, which used to be the car, but fall in love with the original problem. And what is the original problem? What is the original customer frustration? The customer frustration, the original problem is, I want to get from A to B. It's as simple as that. And we thought for way too long, okay, if I have to get from A to B, I'm going to use a car. But the customer frustration is this: a car is expensive. It's a lot of hassle. It's complex. There's loads of idle capacity. The car is standing parked somewhere for 95% of the time. It's unsafe. It's no good for planet and people. And too much mobility creates immobility. There's more traffic jams than ever before. So there's a lot of customer frustration. A car no longer equals freedom. Marketing still tries to tell us that it is freedom, but it's no longer our freedom. So after Red Ocean strategy, it is, okay, how can we turn those customer frustrations into customer delight and engage our customers? And I do believe that engaging customers is about CMM, customer managed mobility. And I think that this is the future of mobility, customer managed mobility. And Toby is a perfect example of that. That is, mobile devices combined with mobility devices, no longer call it cars, it's all type of mobility devices combined with big data and artificial intelligence will create hyper-personalized travel from A to B. I can travel from A to B exactly like I want to travel from A to B. And it'll be my choice because it'll be an app on my mobile device. That is the future of mobility. My app equals freedom, no longer a car. And that is the new mindset. So the future of mobility will be a feast. It'll be fast, it'll be easy, it'll be very accessible, it'll be very simple, and it will be very tempting. And that is the future of mobility, a feast. But that will lead to a blurring of the traditional industry lines. All industries will melt down together. It has and it will have an impact on public transport, city management, infrastructure, hospitality, real estate, insurance, banking, airlines, energy, retail. And you can name like 20, 30 industries that are going to be quite affected by this new mobility. So the question is, when is this going to happen? Now, I can tell you, it's going to happen way sooner than we could ever expect. It's going to happen faster. And we are entering the twilight 20s, the zone in between the old mobility and the new mobility that's somewhere after the horizon. And this is the in-between zone. This is the transition zone. And you might think that this is the zones of monsters and creeps, because if you're a traditional company, you don't like the twilight zone. But if you're a new way of thinking company, this is the zone of endless opportunities. It's the zone in which we will see the rise of smart ecosystems of companies that all work together to create this new type of mobility. So we're going to enter in a world that is going to be zero emissions, zero zero accidents, zero ownership, and also zero tolerance, because the old world will not tolerate whatever accident with autonomous cars. There's zero tolerance versus that new stuff. And I'm going to end with that, there is zero vision. And I hope that David can convince a couple of people of a vision, because we miss the vision for that future. When we drive, when we talk about ACES, when we talk about customer managed mobility, we need a vision of the people that run cities and run governments about that future of mobility. And it's no longer the chicken or the egg, it's a chicken and the egg at the same time. We need to solve a couple of problems all at the same time. The best example was usually about electric cars. Yeah, there is no need for electric cars because there is not enough charging stations, and then there are not enough charging stations because there's not enough electrical cars. So it's no matter of let's find out what is the chicken and what is the egg. Let's do the chicken and the egg at the same time. Now, that was my vision on the future of mobility, Joren.
Thank you very much for that. And Rick, you're emphasizing that you're right on time, because I asked Rick multiple times to make sure that he didn't go over the 10 minutes. So thank you
I
very
promised
much.
you, man. I promised you.
Thank you very much for keeping your promise. So that was Rick's vision on the future of mobility. And I would love to jump right now to David Dixon, because David, of course, your future is very aligned with that. It's very complementary, but you're tackling mobility from a different perspective, from a different point of view. So please, if you could give us your opinion and your vision, that would be absolutely fabulous.
Can you see my screen, I will hope?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. So, well, Rick has been the true philosopher here and kept us at 50,000 feet and managed to stay within his time. I will probably fail to do all three, because I'm going to land right on the ground and try and apply the terrific points he was making, and the more points perspective that he is urging upon all of us. And I want to start with zero vision, because we actually have had very real experience with zero vision when universal access to car ownership, or access dawned after the end of World War II and into the 1950s and early 60s, we had no vision for how to plan to use this new mobility paradigm to create the kind of world we wanted. Instead, we let the paradigm create the world it wanted. And I think if we ever need evidence of the importance of his last statement, it is we can't afford to repeat that history. So I'm going to talk very quickly about, I'm actually going to probably pick up more than anything else on his word soon. If you think about a major development project, an important civic policy, a change in community attitudes, these all take a number of years. We should have started a couple of years ago. We've got to start now doing the planning, holding the community conversations, developing the policy that prepare us to manage this transformational change in mobility paradigms that is heading very rapidly our way. And we need to do it in the context of who we are. And I'm going to frankly speak like a North American, not just an American, because it's the world I know best. So if this change were happening in 1970, for example, then we might truly face a world in which everyone was going to get in their autonomous Tesla and play computer games while they rode out to the middle of nowhere because they have 5 kids and wanted a great big suburban house in the country. That is not the world, certainly, that we see in North America, nor actually across the developed world. In fact, the large majority of growth in our households for the next 20 years is going to be singles and couples without kids. This is, despite some of the memes that have emerged from the discussions around COVID, the most urban housing market North America, and actually the developed world, because this data is really for the developed world, will have had, certainly in mind, I keep coming back to this, overly long, hopefully not overly, but long lifetime. This is a market that is, and housing is the large majority of our real estate industry, and our real estate industry does shape our regions. This is the most urban, most core-centric demographic market we will have had literally since World War II. At the same time, we have an economy that everyone on this call knows is being shaped by companies like Toby's and nexxworks. It is about knowledge and innovation. This is where all the growth in jobs in the developed world is happening. It is this is happening at a time, and particularly over the next 20 years, where, how should I say this? If all the growth in households is households without kids, that means we're not producing something, new workforce. And so as our workforce is growing much more slowly, right now half as fast as it did even in 2010, this is actually across the developed world, we're developing significant labor shortages in a period when 90+% of net new jobs require higher education. This means across the globe, actually, more global than I thought here, there is a growing, actually pretty dramatic shortage of, and therefore competition for talent, educated, creative workforce. This workforce is resoundingly urban, and that data has held true right through these months of COVID. Very interesting, the New York Times had an article, I think 2 days ago, that pointed out that in the midst of the weak housing rental market in New York that's coincided with COVID, 22,000 new tech jobs have been created in Manhattan as innovation companies. Somebody from, I think it was Amazon, said, talent goes where talent is. We want to be in Manhattan if we're going to succeed going forward, because our natural resource is talent. So our markets, our economy are headed into cities, and then along comes what Rick's been talking about. The new norm around mobility. I love face as opposed to case or whatever. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting. Never mind. But fleet as opposed to connected or shared rather. Because that is very true. But I want to really emphasize the shared side of this, because we are definitely, we are already rapidly entering the era of shared mobility. What this means, And I'm going to now put the C back in when it comes to, or at the head of the line here, when it comes to connected, by probably maybe not the, well, it's already happening. In the early 2020s, we already have access to connected technology that is beginning to make a real difference. And I'll give you a very specific example. We're doing planning for the largest concentration of largest innovation cluster in Canada. It's outside of Ottawa. It's called Canada North. And frankly, it's located, it grew up in that office park you see to the right. That is not the future of innovation cluster. This is about a place that has to attract talent. This was a great article and cartoon from the Wall Street Journal, not known for its cartoons, about the joys of urban tech, meaning for these industries to thrive, to continue to attract the kind of talent they need to grow and stay here. Otherwise, they'll get up and go to Paris or Seattle or Boston, where they're welcome. I'm from Boston. We have to transform this into an urban place. We have to create centers of critical mass that are full of life and activity and music and fun and beer and still more beer and maybe some coffee. Because what these industries are saying, very interestingly, these companies are saying a lot of their workforce is working from home. They are in many ways just as productive as they were when they were working together, with one very big exception. How they measure it, I don't know, but innovation productivity is down 54%, and they are very concerned about that. They want their workforce to be place-based. They want it to come and work together. It is the collisions, the unplanned conversations that plant the seeds for Toby and Rick's and the other great companies like them's future, and therefore our future. And so we need to create a place that is people-centric, place-centric, with lively squares. And to do this, we've got to get a lot of people living and working and playing within 5-minute walks of each other. Now, we can't do this everywhere. So how do we bring this entire park to life? By in the next couple of years, as we create the housing that will take off. There's a very strong market for this housing. Market drives retail. That will bring the retail, the coffee, the beer, more beer, and still more beer, the fun. It'll only happen in certain places within these sort of compact critical masses. We're going to connect everything with a pilot automated shuttle. The technology is there today, and yes, it operates in the snow, something very important to Canadians who all think Americans live in Florida. But it will, so that anybody can simply get up from their office, go downstairs, press a button, get a ride to somebody else, run into somebody else on the way, have the conversation that unleashes the next great technology, et cetera. Maybe equally important, we can connect this system to the light rail transit that is available in Ottawa, so that we basically have 2 trips, but when the train shows up, it sends a signal to the automated shuttle to be ready to pick everybody up to bring them to Canada North, meaning that fewer folks will have to drive here. And I'm talking about in the next couple of years, but when they get here, they will never again have to get in a car to drive someplace to lunch, to drive to see somebody. That is a huge difference, essential to the productivity and competitiveness of Canada North. And all of this is today. It'll take a few years to put in place, but it's today. By the early 2030s, 60% of vehicles in North America, and I'm sure that will include Europe and much of Asia, will be connected. By 2040. Majority of vehicles will be driverless. This is due to my great colleagues at Stantec, who are part of our smart mobility group. What does this mean? There are 5 very important dividends that I want to talk about. One is the amenity dividend. Most of us think about the places we live, and again, think where all the growth in housing markets is coming from, as the 5 minutes, the things we can walk to in 5 minutes, the great restaurants, caffeine places, bars, art, etc. This was a quick study I did for Oklahoma City. When we have shared autonomous mobility, it won't be a 5-minute walk, it'll be a 5-minute on-demand trip. So the entire core will become the amenity shed, a much more compelling attractor to bring folks into the cores of our cities and our close-in urban neighborhoods. This is also going to subsidize urban living. It will cost, at least in the US, about half as much to move around in this world as it does today when you have to own and operate a car. That's for each car. So household with, that's a $5,000 check every year for a household with one car, a $10,000 check for a household with two cars to come live in an urban core where density unlocks the ability to enjoy the benefits of shared mobility. A green dividend, and clearly the electric matters here. When you have shared mobility, you have many fewer vehicles moving on roads also, but you also have a different kind of green dividend. We can finally take back our streets. And we're doing it. I want to take as a side note here. One of the things that COVID is doing, it is a tragedy. It is caused terrible challenges and done a great deal of harm to many of us. But it is, I think, as Rick noted, accelerating trends. It is not changing things. It is making more obvious the challenges and the opportunities we have. And urban streets, at least in my city of Boston, have become the new small town centers. They have just sprung to life as restaurants have claimed streets, and you walk along and run into neighbors and say hi, and it has brought them to life. There is a density dividend. When our density dividend is a few years away. When cars are connected, they self-park. When they self-park, they park in much less space. In 2010, a 1 million square foot mixed-use building in most US cities would have required more than 1 million square feet of parking. By the late 2020s, when vehicles are connected and you can park many more cars in the same parking structures we have already built, we'll be able to build, let's say, 2 million square feet. As we move into the late 2030s, when up to 2040, when a majority of vehicles are driverless and frankly don't park because some fleet dropped us off, that same garage will now support 3 or more million square feet. We are actually urging our clients across the board to do anything they can to stop wasting dollars on expensive structured parking, the expensive structured parking necessary to support critical mass and density and bring places to life, because those garages are going to be redundant remarkably soon. And finally, we have a really important dividend that we haven't figured out yet. And in the US, and I suspect this is true of much of the world, COVID has not correlated with density. It is correlated with poverty. It has been an extremely unequal pandemic. And that has accelerated something that is probably a bigger problem in my dear country than in many, but the growing challenges we have around equity and justice in many forms. But I will point out that over the next 20 years, not only are we going to have fewer households with kids and a stronger knowledge economy, we are also going to have a much greater income divide. Not leaving 20% of us behind, but right now the data would suggest across most of the developed world, leaving maybe 70 or 80% of us behind that top 20%. And the trends I've talked about are gonna make urban cores even more wonderful. That means more expensive. The number of poor folks living in US suburbs is up by more than 2/3 just since 2000 as our cities have flourished and displaced folks. There are very real measures of the inequity we now face. Thank you very much. Look forward to your questions. And I'm so amazed that Jordan didn't tell me to stop. So thank you.
Well, you were on a runner, David. So thanks for your contribution. So we have already heard quite a lot of different angles on how this is going to impact businesses. And of course, Toby, I'm really curious what you think about the transportation future and about what we have heard from Rick and David. Maybe just introduce yourself and give us some extra information about your background, and please introduce to us how you see the future of mobility evolving based on your background and based on what you do today.
Sure, and I think it's fascinating listening to both perspectives on where we're going, because it fits within the scope of what Skipper is doing and really our vision. And that's so for everybody to know. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Skipper, and really what we've redefined even through COVID to be our vision now is to make sustainable mobility the default for employees. right? It has to be the obvious choice for professionals out there to be able to make the right decisions and to really make a change. And, you know, we're seeing that in terms of everything that's been discussed here, in terms of infrastructure changes, in terms of the cities, but then also how people want to access mobility. And there's already some questions around, you know, whether tech solves those problems or not, and, you know, whether we need to potentially change those habits. I think that there's a big challenge ahead of us in terms of helping companies to understand what are the options available to them, and what are the choices that they can make today. So, you know, do you have to give, especially in Belgium, do you have to give a company car to an employee as they join the company? Is that really something that makes the company attractive to join? Do you have the ability to give public transport subscriptions, that sort of thing? Should you basically help employees purchase a bike and come to work with a bike? So there's lots of options, but still a sort of general unknown around what is the best way to navigate that field. And so we're helping a lot of companies understand that sort of landscape. And we help them transition to our platform. So, you know, we have a SaaS platform that helps apply different mobility policies, that sort of thing. We also have a application that helps you navigate and use any provider that you want, especially in Belgium. It's very well integrated. And then we have a payment card that allows you basically access to all mobility. Now, in that space, we allow basically employees to do whatever they want in terms of mobility and use it as they would normally. And so the last part of this whole equation, which we're seeing as a real big trend, especially when we come back to how people access mobility and the impact of mobility, is understanding the sustainable impact, and to make really clear decisions on sustainable impact of taking a car or Uber now, which has been popularized for the last 5-10 years, is actually, you know, has a big impact. And so how do you offset that? How do you counterbalance your choices in mobility today with better choices for the future? And, you know, how do you change habits? How do you make it more effective? How do you open up that space and really see from a measurable perspective the impact that you've delivered? And so we're on that spectrum, basically, in terms of our vision and our approach. And so that sort of, you know, feeds really nicely in terms of some of the core topics that have been brought up by David and Rick.
Exactly. David, indeed, because Toby was mentioning the fact that here in Belgium, we're giving a lot of company cars to employees. Your stance is that talent is definitely driving mobility, and that talent is deciding how mobility is going to look like in the future. What's your idea about that? Because I grew up in an urban town, to say so. There's what I see there is indeed that it is very hard for companies to attract talent. So they give out cars, because that's the easiest way to get around there is by giving out cars to companies. What's your opinion on that? Like, does it have to do with infrastructure? How can they solve this, or what's the idea there?
Rick, do you want to start?
Think for who was the question?
For David, but
I thought it was for both of us. Okay. Well, first of all, I think that given the fact that talent drives economic success for companies, starting with employees really makes sense. You've got to make them happy with you have to attract them in the first place, and starting with their attitudes toward mobility, I think is absolutely ground central. I noticed one of the things when we plan, the first people we often go and talk to are the human resource directors for companies in an area to find out what's going to attract, what do you need to do to attract workforce? And basically they consistently say three things. One, a place that is mixed use, live, work, play, et cetera. Can't tell how many folks would like to walk to work, et cetera. Two, a company that is diverse and has really active and effective policies towards diversity. And three, but not in that order, it actually is the reverse order. The first thing they say is green. What is your company's commitment to green? And frankly, it's going to sound very elitist, But when you correlate education with these responses, green comes through as a stronger first answer. And I think the first time a company engages an employee to be able to bring green to the front of that conversation and make it center is an extremely, in the spirit of enlightened self-interest, pragmatic thing to do. That said, we've got to have the kinds of public-private partnerships that give people alternatives. You know, you can't say that at Canada North right now until we've got these vehicles up and running and connecting to transit. They don't have a choice. Now, what that's saying, and I'm sorry, I know this is too long an answer, to the companies at Canada North, because they know their employees want to be green and don't want to drive to work, they won't come to work for those companies if they don't have the kinds of choices that Toby is giving them.
Rick, did you want to chime in there?
No, I fully agree. And it's, again, it's the chicken and the egg. It's both. If you don't provide people with the alternatives, then it's never going to happen. And then you say, see, they don't want it. You know, you have to offer them the occasion to go for different, and that's why I love what Toby is doing, because then there is a real alternative. And I think that companies were waiting for this type of alternative, Toby. I think that you hit a real sweet spot in society. And that's not due to COVID-19. COVID-19 has been speeding that up, but I think that was already going on.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that that's what we've seen right now, is that there's a shift towards a more digital mobility for sure. But a starting point for us in mobility, especially with corporates, is the tax advantages that employees benefit from with a company car and that sort of thing. And I think Belgium is really leading in that sense with the mobility budget. We're now seeing a trend across Europe with regards to that in France, but the entry point for us is HR managers, fleet managers, and they are seeing employees requesting and having a very conscious presence and real definition of going, what is your sustainable policy? And the challenge that we're finding is that a lot of them have targets that are 2030, 2045 targets, but they're so big and unattainable, they just don't know yet how to apply that at a sort of micro level, and as in the next quarter or the next year. So those are some of the challenges that we're seeing as we sort of expand our knowledge on how to tackle this problem.
Absolutely. And I wanted to jump from there to another topic, because we have a question about public transport, and I think it actually connects pretty well to this. Because, of course, Rick, you have been talking about ACES, about autonomous cars. David, you've done the same. The question we get is, of course, what impact will this have on public transportation? Because just this week, we actually saw that because of COVID, people are not taking public transport anymore, but are going everywhere with their cars. So they are clogging up the cities right now. So maybe, Rick, what's your perspective on that? Like, how is public transport going to be impacted by autonomous vehicles? Because right now we don't even have them, but once there's a pandemic, everybody jumps in his or her car. What do you think about that?
I think that the pandemic and everybody jumps in his own car is only, you can understand it, but I think this is only a temporary phenomenon. I think if you think about autonomous cars, especially fleet-owned cars, then the question, what is public transport and what is not public transport, kind of disappears, because everything is going to be shared and everything is going to be public transport in some way or another. So I think that this is an old economy type of question, an old economy type of dilemma. If you think about this is going to be the future, in the future, it'll be an app that brings me from A to B, and I will be able to make a choice. Do I do it on my own? Do I want to share my vehicle? Do I want it green? Do I want it fast? Do I want it? I mean, I will have the choice. And the very moment I will have the choice, I will no longer own one of the vehicles that brings me from A to B. They will all be fleet owned. So what is public transport? Everything is going to be public transport by definition.
David, according to you, what impact will this have on automotive companies, on car companies? What's your vision on that?
One word, major. No. I think that it's very interesting. Marie Barra, the new president of General Motors, was quoted in Forbes as saying that she was basically brought in because General Motors has to basically entirely retool itself as a company for exactly the world that Rick has described, and the big manufacturers, the OEMs, are doing that to a very large degree. They want to own these fleets, and let me point out that among other things, they basically sell a very expensive vehicle, create a very expensive vehicle each year, and then sell it. Many of those changes are basically, to come back to computers on wheels, software updates. If they lease a car to you, they can simply send those software updates to you, probably charge you for them, and not spend $28,000 having to construct a new vehicle. So and local municipalities can basically collect some income as you drive because they know you're in that vehicle also. That's another issue. I think that this is a change that everybody sees coming, understands, and they're positioning themselves. And the ability to be agile as a company, and that's not even the word I want to use, but to be able to redefine your business, your mission, and therefore your business model, and therefore who you need quickly, is absolutely critical. And I think the auto industry's struggle to do that is a great example. That's one reason why they've raised so much money in recent years. One of the concerns that I have about the public discussion, I'll call it, I won't call it a debate, around autonomous mobility is that you do have transit folks. I'm on the board of an organization called America Walks, and I've got to say, walking folks, and you have autonomous mobility folks, and there's a little bit of siloing going on, as opposed to what we're all doing here. They all can benefit and complement each other. The ability of a train to show up, have sent 28 messages to shared autonomous vehicles to say we've got 75 people going to these 36 locations, et cetera, will make it much easier to take transit. There is no way that FACE, or whatever it is going to compete for longer haul trips. And I mean, across neighborhoods to neighborhoods with shared autonomous mobility going forward. It is, and one of the things that we have not talked about is how much less expensive it is ultimately per trip and per person to operate in this world. It costs about $11,000 or $12,000 to own and operate a car in the US per car. You can't spend half that much on the kinds of things we're talking about.
Absolutely. I was going to chime in here because 2 years ago we were in Silicon Valley and we talked to somebody from Waymo, so that's the self-driving car company from Google. And when David says it's going to get cheaper, what we heard there was the guy saying like, yeah, well, how we see it is that somebody else is going to pay for your mobility. For example, if you buy a ticket for the cinema, for example, if they still exist with the current crisis, of course, in the future, but a cinema might be able to pay for your mobility needs. You buy a ticket for the cinema, a car picks you up, brings you to the cinema and returns you. The same could be the case for a restaurant. And that's an interesting touch point, because once we have autonomous cars, there could be a real added value for other businesses to use them. I don't know, Toby, do you see or feel that there's interest there for, like, apart from normal organizations, but from restaurants, other companies, to look at mobility from different perspective?
It's something I think that's on the horizon. I think it's, I always think of autonomous cars as having still having to pass a real test, and that test is driving in Europe. I mean, driving in America is quite, standardized, is big fat roads and quite square in terms of layout, whereas try and take an autonomous car through Italy, it's a bit more challenging. But in those scenarios, we are seeing, and part of our portfolio companies within the sort of Skipper family is a company that does autonomous ushering vehicles, like the one that David spoke about in Ottawa. And we are seeing certainly corporations being interested in using or having a pool of vehicles, whatever it is, at the disposal of their clients or whoever they may be. And we're seeing that today more in the shape of companies You might think of like one of the big fours or one of the major corporates. So if I take an example as a Coca-Cola, they might want to say, hey, we want to have a fleet of cars or e-steps or electric bikes or whatever vehicle at the disposal of our employees so that they can navigate and go back and forth to different locations, or to potential candidates for job interviews or potential clients, or those kind of things. And so we're slowly seeing those kind of elements trickle into the demands. And this is actually one of the areas of research and development that we're looking at for next year, is to start implementing that in our ecosystem, because it joins one of the points that you were mentioning, which is other people paying for those services. And I think that that's where companies are paying for those budgets, and that enables and changes people's habits. And they go, oh yeah, it's cool. It's on my company budget. No worries. I can go to this destination, and the mobility service of choice is present and accessible.
We are talking about mobility services right now, not just about cars. Rick, I wanted to listen to you because you have a good idea about how this is going to impact other businesses than just car companies. Can you give a couple of examples? Could you share that?
Yeah, of course. If you think about, just imagine that I have to take, yesterday I flew to Vienna for the first time in many months. And I already know how much hassle that is taking a flight. For a 1 hour flight takes me half a day. Just imagine at some point that I have this mobility device, and some self-driving car stops in front of my house, and I can have my very own, very personal transport from Brussels to Berlin or from Brussels to Vienna. That is devastating if you're in the airline business. That's devastating if you're in the hotel business. And so instead of the hotel business or the airline business thinking, oh shit, what is going to happen, they'd better gear up and think about, hey, how can we participate into that type of new business models? And they're not going to do it on their own. And that's why I'm a strong believer that this is going to be ecosystems of different type of companies that didn't work together in the past, in the old economy, will have to kind of work together in a totally new setup and a totally new type of business model in an ecosystem to create that type of mobility from A to B. And that's only one example, but it's also devastating if for infrastructure in retail, for instance. Now retail, an A location, a B location, and a C location will be completely different, because I no longer have to drive there. I no longer have to park my car. I'll be picked up wherever I want, and I will be able to go there in every way I want it myself. And there's loads of examples that you can give. It will have a large impact. One of the people was asking, one of the persons here was asking, hey, but are people not going to get out of the city and live on the countryside? But if you think it the reverse way, if we take the car out of the city, then we can bring green back into the city. And then the city will become a totally new type of environment than the environment that we see today. So I think that we have to dare to flip over the way we think about that new economy and that new mobility. David?
So one of the things that this last discussion has really illustrated to me is, how should I say it, how much faith we are going to have in the ability of this new world to learn from itself and adapt. So you talked about something I had never thought about, Joran, a restaurant paying for your trip so you'll go eat there. That's that until you mentioned that idea had, I promise I will not lose that idea for the rest of my life as I think about how this system works. My dear company operated an autonomous vehicle test track, and one of its vehicles hit a chicken with a plastic bag tied to its foot. That vehicle had been taught not to hit chickens through AI, but no one had ever shown it a photo of a chicken with anyway. After it hit that chicken, no more chickens with plastic bags are going to be hit, because all the vehicles in the fleet will have learned the lesson from that one vehicle. I think one of the fascinating things is that we tend to do, we can't help it. We look at the challenges we're going to face in the future, given our capabilities today to deal with them. And it's really important to be able to get into the minds. We all have to have a little implant so we can have an AI mindset to understand how we're going to learn from experience, and learn from an experience with vehicles and a technology that is constantly in communication with itself, so that one vehicle learns something, the entire global fleet will learn it.
Joran, can I add one thing?
Of course.
Yeah, David, you have grandchildren as well.
Yes.
Watch Cinderella, the Walt Disney movie. At a certain moment, the fairy godmother says, "Hey, Cinderella, you don't have to look at the things as they are, but have to look at the things as they can become." And that's exactly what we need to do. Call it the Cinderella principle.
Okay, I will try that out on my 6-year-old grandson. Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. It's already 5 minutes to 4, so we actually have to wrap up. Just one more thing, maybe, because a lot of things we've talked about is about the change in business models or the impact on businesses, but what impact will this all have on infrastructure? Because David, from your perspective as an urban planner, what impact will new mobility have on infrastructure? Can you briefly share that with us?
Well, Rick already stole some of my thunder, but in our great big wide American streets, we don't, believe me, we think Europe will solve this first, but we're going to get 40 to 50% of all that, 15% of the average US city is basically dedicated to street right-of-way. We're gonna get maybe half of that back. That all belongs to the public sector. The city itself will be able to determine what to do with suddenly 7.5% of its net area in terms of not blue waves, but green systems running through our cities, the ability to spill out onto the street so that retail works in an entirely different way, because suddenly it owns, it can own, or not own, but operate and manage a significant new chunk of downtown and urban neighborhoods. The other, I think there's been a great fear of loss of income from things like gas tax, et cetera. We have two challenges around this on the fiscal side. One, we're a rapidly aging society. When folks get older, it's very hard to raise their taxes because they're on fixed incomes. So cities have got to find ways, and I think this will do it by opening an era for more intense and dense and active and vital and therefore valuable urban development, to create the fiscal resources to be able to address a lot of the infrastructure challenges we have that go way beyond what I'm talking about. Very immediately, because it's always great to think about what to do next year, we've got to get sensors into all our parking spaces so that cars can go find them and we don't have to drive the car to them. That will save us a lot of money.
All right. Okay.
Fine.
Guys, it was a real pleasure. It was really short, but I'm happy to have had you here. Thank you so much for participating into this discussion. I know there are a lot more questions from the audience. So if you want, don't hesitate to share them with us in the chat box. We will send them to the speakers and ask them very nicely to reply to these questions and share them with you together with the recording of this webinar. Just for your information, the next webinar is about insurance, which can be interesting, we promise you. It's not all boring that is insurance, but still, if you're not interested in insurance, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We do a lot of other interesting stuff. For example, we're launching a monthly program very comparable to this session about customer experience. So it's called Mission CX. Franz will share the link with you in the chat. Please bear with us, answer the poll about, or with your opinions about this webinar. What did you think about it? Did you like it? Did you hate it? We'd love to hear so. If you hated it, please do share why. You can send us an email, drop us a call. We are very happy to listen. That's it for today. All I can do right now is wish you a good weekend, or if your day is just getting started like David's, David, a good Friday there. Have a nice work day, and everybody else, thank you so much for tuning in today, and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you soon.